religious communities to inspire and empower them to be good stewards of the earth. And so this is part of our Green Forum series. They're a series of 90-minute workshop forums where we bring in experts on different topics. And this one on environmental racism is actually the fourth one that we've done in the state in the last 18 months. It's an incredibly important topic. And as a key piece of why IREJN got founded in the first place, we were founded many, many years ago in response to dirty power plants that were situated in New Haven and Bridgeport and that sort of thing. And so the concept of environmental injustice was something that we really wanted to address. So thank you so much for being here. As Melinda said, we have a lot of food. And we are very grateful to our three speakers, Taylor Mays, Alex Rodriguez, and Representative Reyes, to come and talk to us about a variety of issues regarding environmental racism and injustice and what we can do about it. So I will be putting everybody's email on our e-list because we have a lot of environmental legislation that's coming up this week and in this session in Hartford. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to do good and to make change, but we actually have to do that. We have to call and email and write our legislators. We need to show up for public hearings and submit testimony. It does make a difference. And we have a lot of opportunities this session, so we just need to move it forward. I don't email people a ton unless there's legislation that's about to happen. And as you know, things do happen very quickly. There are a couple of public hearings this week, so you'll be hearing from me probably tomorrow. So the first...
We have this one thing, that if you are not sure if you are registered to vote in the right place, we have PJ over here with a computer, because voting is everything this year. So double check, or he can tell you how to help other people double check to make sure that they're registered and are able to vote. Sorry.
No, that's great, absolutely. Register to vote. Very important. So I think, well first,
I just wanted to mention a couple of housekeeping things.
Oh, yes.
The bathrooms are, you go out that way and up the stairs to the right is the women's and down the stairs to the right is the men's. I don't know if there's any other particular piece of information you need. That probably covers it.
There's a gender-neutral restroom at the other end of the hall upstairs.
Thank you.
And the cups are not to be thrown away.
Yeah, please don't throw the cups away. I'm sure you weren't going to do that anyway. Nobody was going to do that. I had an idea which I didn't share with you in advance, but what I thought would be nice if we take like 30 seconds and you turn to someone near you and share, why you're here, why you came tonight. Can we take 30 seconds to do that before we have the speakers start? Okay, so go.
Go.
Here because you invited me.
Yes, yeah, so that's wonderful.
You have a great, I know this young man, I know Tisha, I know some of the folks, but I don't know some who was here. I'm from Waterbury.
Yeah, well, so now you can learn about our wonderful town. Yeah, UTC was one of our speakers last year. I remember, it wasn't environmental racism, I forgot the thing, but, it all came on.
It always comes back, doesn't it?
Okay, thank you for doing that. So, we'll get started with the panelists, or the video.
I'm just going to show a short 3.5-minute video on a sort of brief history of environmental justice. So someone could maybe hit those lights over there. I see lights.
Could you move that table stand just a teeny little bit to the left so we can see the whole screen?
Nationally, the facilities where we dump our garbage and process dangerous chemicals tend to be located in poor and minority communities. The people who live there have little or no protection from the industries around them, and things could get worse. So there's this idea of environmental justice. It's pretty simple. Communities shouldn't be forced to deal with more pollution because they belong to a certain race, national origin, or income bracket. Yet America has struggled over the years to implement any serious policy that actually protects these communities. So let's lay out the ways the government has failed them.
We will not allow one county to become a dump site.
The fight for environmental justice took off in 1982, when residents of Warren County, North Carolina mounted mass demonstrations against a plan to dump contaminated soil in a landfill in their community. The EPA investigated 4 similar landfills in southern states and found they were all located in Black or low-income neighborhoods. In 1987, the United Church of Christ Racial Justice Commission found that around the country, hazardous waste facilities were more likely to be located in mostly minority communities. Amid mounting proof, the federal government was forced to act.
George Herbert Walker Bush.
So in 1992, President George H.W. Bush founded the Office of Environmental Justice inside the EPA. 2 years later, President Bill Clinton signed an executive order requiring federal agencies to consider environmental justice in all of their policies, as well as extending civil rights protection to environmental discrimination. But Congress never passed a bill to make Clinton's executive order law. Then came George W. Bush. His administration shifted the focus of the Office of Environmental Justice from protecting low-income and minority communities to all people, leaving vulnerable populations without a federal environmental advocate.
80% of New Orleans, including much of downtown, is underwater.
Under Bush, many environmental civil rights claims were rejected or delayed for years. In 2009, after President Barack Obama's election, his administration recommitted to environmental justice.
Generally speaking, in this country, a lot of environmentally problematic facilities tend to be located in places where poor folks live.
Yet, during the 2 years Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House, they didn't file a single bill focused on strengthening environmental justice protections. Passing major environmental legislation faded further when Republicans took control of Congress in the 2010 midterm elections. Now, President Donald J. Trump is making good on his vow to weaken the EPA.
Environmental protection, what they do is a disgrace. Every week they come out with new regulations. They make it
It's not affect the environment.
They will be fine with the environment. We can leave a little bit.
This budget, a 31% cut to the EPA, $2.6 billion cut away from the EPA. That's what the president wants.
As the EPA loses funding and regulations are rolled back, vulnerable communities may very likely fall through the cracks. I'm Talia Buford. I'll be covering these communities and digging into systemic environmental injustice. If you have something to tell me, email me at talia.buford@propublica.org.
Lights?
Joe, can you turn on the lights? Oh, do you need the lights? You need the lights. Your presence on your So our first speaker is Taylor Mays. She's with the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs. And what is that, Joe? Okay.
Yeah, so hello, I'm Taylor. Thank you, Terry, for this event, and I'm happy to be here with you all talking about this important topic. I do communications for the Roundtable. I graduated from UConn in 2018, so I've been working for about 2 years with the Roundtable. I see one of our board members in the back, Diane. Hi, Diane. So I'll just go ahead and get started. Can you click twice, maybe? So I'm going to start off with a poem. It's called For Sandra by Nikki Giovanni. I wanted to write a poem that rhymes, but revolution doesn't lend itself to bebopping. Then my neighbor, who thinks I hate, asked, "Do you ever write tree poems?" I like trees, so I thought I'll write a beautiful green tree poem. Peeked from my window to check the image, noticed that the schoolyard was covered with asphalt, no green, no trees grow in Manhattan. Then I thought, the sky. I'll do a big blue sky poem. But all the clouds have been low since No Dick was elected. So I thought again, and it occurred to me, maybe I shouldn't write at all. But clean my gun and check my kerosene supply. Perhaps these are not poetic times at all. And most of the photography in here is by a photographer named Brandon Smith. I'm a huge fan of his photography, but he's based in Bridgeport, and I'm hoping to use Bridgeport a lot throughout my presentation as kind of a case study for a lot of these topics. So you can go to the next one. So yeah, I just wanted to open it up to you all if you had any reflections on the poem. If not, then it's okay, but any thoughts or, I don't know, anything come to mind while reading it?
I think it says a lot about people's perspectives on, so it's clear their neighbor is someone who has access to green trees. You know, and doesn't understand that not everybody does. You know, so it's a sort of a symbol of white privilege. You know, that poetry should be about these things, but they take them for granted.
Yeah.
Like, don't you ever write something about this everyday thing that we see all the time, except not everybody gets that.
That's right, yeah.
You need to have the microphone, because
Oh.
we can't hear you.
Sorry.
I was just saying, my impression was that it was a symbol of white privilege that the person would ask, you know, why don't you write poems about green trees? Just in a reflection of the fact that that was something that that person took so for granted that it was, why could you possibly not write about this commonplace, beautiful thing? But not everyone has green trees. I mean, as we see in Flint, not everyone has clean water.
Right. Yeah.
The schoolyard had no leaves on the ground, so no trees, so children weren't being brought up in the same sort of environment where they could appreciate it and learn about it.
It's like something we take for granted almost, that we all have that.
Don't forget to use the mic, please.
Oh yeah, it's something that I also had, you know, green trees growing up, and it's something that we can all take for granted having, you know, been with our whole life. So. Okay, next. Oh wait, Leticia, did you have a question? Oh yeah.
I was wanted, well, it's not so much, I guess, that I wish to comment on the line, but I was curious what others thought. I was curious what others thought about the last line, or the second to last line, where it's, I'm going to clean my gun and something with kerosene.
Yeah.
And what, if that triggered anybody, or had them thinking of other times in history where people of color decided to arm up to protect their neighborhoods.
That's right.
And things like that. So I don't have a question, I have a more comment.
Yeah, and I will say that this poem was written in 1968 to give some context. Richard, I have a few little citations. Richard Nixon was just elected, so yeah. It was a time when Black people were definitely very militant and arming themselves against violent police, which is very similar to the time period we're at right now, which is why I like this poem. Next. So I think that grounding ourselves in truth is really important, and the truth of our history, and sometimes we kind of scapegoat a lot of this stuff when we're having conversations about environmental racism and environmental justice. We don't go back to the history because it's kind of boring and dull, but yeah, I think it's important to talk about. Who can go next? So many of, if not all of the fathers of our conservation movement were deeply racist. And this racism came directly from 300 years of chattel slavery and Native American genocide. And I have a quote here from the New Yorker that says, "American culture, which even for most abolitionists meant the culture of a white nation." So who were the founding fathers of our conservation movement? There's little arrows at the bottom. Okay, that's better. So you can hit the next arrow. One more time. One more time. Yeah. So Henry David Thoreau, in his influential 1862 essay, Walking, wrote, "I think that the farmer displaces the Indian even because he redeems the meadow, and so makes himself stronger and in some respects more natural." John Muir, a co-founder of the Sierra Club and a disciple of Thoreau, wrote about the indolence of black sandals. He described the Miwok, the indigenous people of Yosemite, as dirty and altogether hideous. They seem to have no right place in the landscape. FDR, in light of this history, it's perhaps unsurprising that Muir and FDR went on perhaps the most consequential camping trip in American history in 1903. the president conserved 230 million acres of public land, an area larger than Texas, through the expulsion of indigenous peoples and the rural poor.
That was Teddy, by the way, Teddy Roosevelt.
The beloved Teddy Roosevelt, yes. And
May I just interrupt for a sec?
Sure.
Sorry. Teddy Roosevelt once said, "The only good Indian is a dead Indian."
Really?
He was very against indigenous people, the First Nations.
Yeah. And then Madison Grant was also a prominent conservationist and wrote The Passing of the Great Race, which influenced the Immigration Act of 1924. And Adolf Hitler even called this book his Bible. And it limited a lot of immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe and Africa, and banned migrants from Asia. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about, jumping ahead a little bit, the impacts of public parks and public or highways, essentially, on Black communities. I think there's a lot of parallels between the rhetoric around Native American displacement and Black communities that were trying to thrive post-slavery, post all these really racist Black laws after slavery. So I have a short video. Well, it's actually not too short, but it's kind of short. Yeah. See if it'll load.
This is Central Park. It's an iconic part of New York City, a piece of nature tucked inside Manhattan. If you've lived in New York or even visited, you've probably been here.
But there's a part of this land story that visitors will never see.
It's the story of what was here before the park and the community that was destroyed to make way for it. In the 1820s, New York City looked like this. Most people lived in this area, Lower Manhattan. Pretty much everything above it was yet to be settled. In this map, you can see how different the geography was. These little lines illustrate what used to be hills in Manhattan. This was the countryside. Downtown was the opposite. Lower Manhattan was dense and crowded. A few small neighborhoods were home to many of the city's poor whites and immigrants, and also to much of its Black population. This document shows the number of slaves in New York State. You can see how it went down gradually, from 20,000 in 1800 to 10,000 in 1820, and finally to just 75 in 1830. That's because in New York, slavery wasn't abolished all at once. Instead, it was ended over about 30 years. And as more free Black people joined the workforce, racial tensions rose.
The people who were enslaved were now in competition with people coming over for jobs.
That tension led to violence, and Lower Manhattan became increasingly dangerous for free Black people. Then, in 1825, plots of land started to go up for sale here, uptown. It was a way out. A Black man named Andrew Williams decided to buy 3 lots.
You know, word gets out, Black people seeing other Black people and saying, oh, there's a little bit of a community developing here, maybe we can just fold into this community. So they start to move in.
After Williams, more lots filled up with Black families and churches.
And it was here, between 82nd and 89th Street, that the community of Seneca Village was born.
Moving up to Seneca Village offered Black families an affordable, safe place. It also gave them the chance to vote. Black men could only vote in New York if they owned property. Over the course of the next 3 decades, the community grew to nearly 300 residents. Records from the census show that they were laborers, domestic workers, waiters, and shoemakers. And they built dozens of homes, 3 churches, and a school for Black students. Later, when Irish and German immigrants started moving into Seneca Village, it became unique for another reason.
It was an integrated community. It seems that people of all ethnicities were likely getting along based on the church records that were here.
Among the documents are evidence that some white and Black families attended baptisms together, were buried next to each other in the same cemetery and intermarried.
The people who lived in this area were individuals who were trying to find a new way of life.
Over the next 3 decades, the population of New York City nearly quadrupled. Lower Manhattan could no longer hold everyone. The city's white elite were worried that the entire island would be consumed by development. They said it called for the necessity of a city park to give lungs to the city.
This came out of the elite being able to start to travel to Europe, and they see the Champs-Élysées, and they see Kensington Park, and they think that the city deserves to have a park of that stature.
On July 21st, 1853, New York set aside 750 acres of land to create America's first major landscaped public park, the Central Park. But the proposed area for the park included Seneca Village, along with thousands of other lots of land, home to about 1,600 people. In order to facilitate the park's development, the city's newspapers started to downplay who really lived there.
They really described these people as living in shanties and shacks. People of the base cultures were living off the land.
But that wasn't true. In 2011, Cynthia and a team of archaeologists excavated in the former Seneca Village site. They came away with 250 bags of objects to analyze, which now live here in New York City's archaeological repository. These objects suggest that Seneca Village was wealthier than many assumed.
When we compare the objects from the homes of the people in Seneca Village with artifacts from Greenwich Village, an elite upper middle class neighborhood, in some cases they were using the same kind of ironstone plate within what was called the Gothic pattern.
Quite a few pieces of porcelain in Seneca Village, and porcelain was an expensive ware.
They also found other objects like a comb, a smoking pipe, roasting pan, and part of a toothbrush that probably didn't belong to poor people.
Toothbrushes were not common among the working class as well as the middle class until around 1920.
And the artifacts themselves were only one part of their analysis.
For example, from the census records from 1855, we know that there was a very high level of education.
Getting a high school education was clearly an important factor in the community, and that's very much a part of middle class identity.
The findings indicate that Seneca Village wasn't a shanty town. It was a working and middle-class community, a growing neighborhood of Black property owners, and an experiment in integration. But to the white New York elite of 1856, it wasn't worth saving. A July 1856 article in the New York Times referred to it with a slur. The Eben inhabitants, after whom the village is called, have been notified to remove by the 1st of August. Many residents fought to keep their land by filing objections to their forced removal, but Seneca Village, along with the other settlements on the land for Central Park, was seized and destroyed. In their place, the city made pathways, built bridges and arches, and planted thousands of trees. Central Park was done, and Seneca Village was gone forever.
We can't imagine New York City without Central Park, but I'm finally grateful that the recognition of the pre-park history has emerged.
Today, New York is starting to reckon with this part of its history. An exhibition with information about Seneca Village is temporarily up in the park. But the real legacy of Seneca Village is a story that's repeated itself again and again in cities everywhere.
Land, property ownership, that's how you get wealth, and you pass wealth on from generation to generation. But you're getting a bulldozer that comes through because a new highway has to come through, or a new hospital or development site has to come in. Seneca Village was no different. It's time that we own it, and we come to recognize that there are these great stories that live beneath the surface of the park. It's not just African American history, it's just American history.
Okay, that was a long video. Thanks for hearing it. So there's a quote here that says, "The destruction of Seneca Village foreshadowed the urban renewal craze of the 1960s, when the country embraced an explicit policy of labeling vibrant working class areas as slums to justify tearing them down." And just a side note here, that Seaside Park in Bridgeport was designed by Calvert Vaux and Frederick Law Olmsted, who also designed Central Park in Manhattan, and a similar story can be told there. So the impact of the freeways, similar concept. Urban renewal was a national federally supported program that gave cities massive federal grants to rebuild their downtowns. And many have pointed out how the program amounted to quote unquote Negro removal because of the way it raised sometimes thriving Black communities. You can go to the next slide. And this is just an example, but this is a picture of Bridgeport in 1913. And if you go to the next slide, this is what the city looks like after the highways have been built. So it essentially took out, if you go, and go one more, you see them side by side. So yeah, so you can see how the highway basically made the city impossible to thrive economically, because you're taking out like the heart of its businesses. And yes, that's exactly what gentrification looks like. And then there's another quote here: "Many neighborhoods, predominantly Black, were wiped out and turned into surface parking and highways." And that's Peter Norton, a historian at the University of Virginia. Another poem, I feel like I'm tight on time. Okay, so we'll skip it. Go to the next one. So this is, many factors contributed to the loss of Black-owned land during the 20th century, including systemic discrimination and lending by the Department of Agriculture and discriminatory housing policies. And a little bit about community control, which is a Black Power framework that emerged in the 80s. It calls for Blacks to take back control over institutions in their own segregated neighborhoods, such as schools, banks, political offices, and stores. And so when I think about environmental justice, I do include racial justice and the Black Power movement. One more. So connecting movements together, similar to the Black Power movement. I have the civil rights movement kind of in the center, and the labor movement in the center of this, and I kind of show how the environmental movement started in the 70s with more emphasis on soil and water, and now has become more focused on air pollution and climate change, but how they're all kind of interconnected, and even now we're seeing more focus on, with the Green New Deal, and the civil rights movement also focused on environment, like there's an image of MLK in the center, and he's striking with sanitation workers. So on diversity, so based on all of these histories, to me, diversity and environmental justice isn't about just having people of color in the room, but it's about intentionally shifting power away from who has been historically exploitative to the environment and racist, and returning agency and control back to Black and brown communities. So in conclusion, some of my goals for the future, I think funding groups that are led by the community in a non-extractive way and a non-exploitative way is really important. And I have some of the logos of some groups that just came off the top of my head that I appreciate. Bridgeport Generation Now, the Catal Center, Groundwork Bridgeport, the NAACP, Black Lives Matter. Those are the type of groups that are doing on the ground work, and I think that should be thrown a lot more money when it comes to these climate change and environmental programs. So,
Thank you.
So when you checked in, you should have gotten a little index gift cards. I will collect them probably around 7:30 if you have questions. So the next person I'm going to introduce is Alex Rodriguez. And he's the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters who works primarily in climate change education and advocacy, correct?
Variety of issues.
A whole bunch of things. So he's going to talk to us about energy equity, transit equity, and waste reduction. Awesome.
Thank you everyone for coming tonight. Thank you Terry and Interreligious Eco-Justice Network for hosting another inspiring evening to talk about environmental racism because it's on us as advocates of this earth to not only be pro-environment but pro-racial justice as well, pro-LGBTQ rights, because and a variety of other demographics. We need to do all we can to lift up those who have been historically underserved by prejudices in our nation's history. I want to start by saying a bit of who I am. I'm a son, I'm a tío, I'm a padrino, I'm a brother, and I say that because those are some of the many identities that I have. I'm a grassroots organizer, and I've been working with the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters for going on 3 years this spring. I started off as an intern, then I made my way up the ladder. And what got me involved in environmental issues in the first place was my concern for my local community's access to clean drinking water. I don't know if everybody remembers how dry Connecticut was in 2016, but it was very frightening to me. I noticed a lot of people around Hartford and Bloomfield upset, and West Hartford. I'm from West Hartford, by the way. I noticed them upset. They were talking about a water bottle company that was vying for our local water utilities' attention, the MDC. And so I listened. I went to a couple town hearings, and I was reading what was in the paper, and I was like, wow, like this MDC Niagara deal sounds really crooked. Like they're the third most successful water bottle company in the country, and now they want to come to Connecticut to take some of our clean water at a discount, as Sister Ruth said. You know, that is what got me into all of this. When I learned about the issue, when I educated myself, I educated my friends about the issue. Four of my closest friends, I brought them together, and I was like, you know, it's time to start speaking truth to power, because these people don't care about our future. We need to fight for our water right now. And so we stormed a town meeting, and we were like, hey, this deal sucks, to be frank. And from there, we started putting on presentations describing the dangers of water privatization and what a big effect that played on climate change impacting our communities. Because if you have a monopoly over water supplies, then that threatens the community's life, that threatens the community's access, that threatens their way of life. And that was not something we were down for. We couldn't stop the plant from being built in Bloomfield, but the community has come out time and time again to fight against the MDC's hold on our water supplies. I want to go back into grassroots organizing. Grassroots organizing is important. I was talking a little bit about shared identity before, and shared identity is one of the first things I talk about with people that I bring in to the League of Conservation Voters to hold committee meetings, volunteer with us at a certain event, because we need to identify our shared struggles. We need to actively listen to one another and see how this person is being impacted by this problem. And then comes strategizing, then comes building the relationships, building that relationship between you and the volunteer, and holding one-on-ones, holding committee meetings as often as you can. I hold 2 committee meetings a month. I work with a group in Hartford that's based off of mostly college students in the region. They're the People for the Planet Committee. In Middletown, I work with a group of mothers and grandmothers, and they're all strong women of color who are very much concerned about their children's livelihood, because they acknowledge that climate change is at our doorstep, and so they're looking for ways to engage with their local lawmakers and their state elected officials on ways that they can collaborate on making a dignified way of life for their children and grandchildren. And that's something I identify with wholeheartedly, because I have nieces and I have a nephew that are a part of my soul. And so, you know, I have shared identity with one group and I have shared identity with another group, and that helps our working relationship. And so they converse with me about issues going on in their community, and I bring some of the issues that the League of Conservation Voters has on their watch list, and I'm like, hey, like, can we get your help with this? Like, do you mind weighing in on this bill, and that bill? And I don't ask them to weigh in on anything that they haven't already set their mind to previously. One of the things that has made my relationships with these 2 groups successful is outlining 2 sets of policy platforms that speak to who they are as individuals. Some of the many things on these policy platforms include support for action-oriented and creatively focused climate change education and energy conservation education in all schools, supporting equal access to expanded residential efficiency programs which lower energy burdens, pollution, and energy expenses. Those are just a couple of the many things. Oh, another thing, supporting the repairing of historical zoning inequities to help our communities thrive. This is something Taylor was touching on earlier when she spoke of the gentrification that has just thrashed Bridgeport. And it's really important that we encourage our volunteers to get involved in the planning and zoning processes, because more often than not, the state is pushing forward an agenda that may not always fit what your municipality knows is the right thing to do. And so, in addition, so in grassroots organizing with these two groups of committee leaders, we've identified a few main issues that harm working class people on the regular, such as energy inequities, waste reduction, and transit inequity. We've identified these as 3 very important issues to zoom in on, because not everyone, there are 400,000 households that can't afford to pay their energy bills. We have a bus system that doesn't always run in time, that isn't always handy capable, and we have a waste problem in Hartford County. 70 towns send their trash to Hartford to be burned in an incinerator that has adverse side effects on the communities living by it. Not only Hartford, Rocky Hill, Wethersfield, New Britain, West Hartford, we're all within that radius. And we all need to take a conscious look at how we're living our lives and what footprint we're leaving. What is our energy footprint? What is our carbon footprint? What is, how much waste are we actively looking to reduce? Because it's not enough to just throw something in the trash anymore and not think about its consequence. It does have a consequence, and someone is breathing in that consequence. And so there's a variety of bills that could be supported. On energy equity, there is Senate Bill 178, an act concerning energy efficiency standards. There is, on waste reduction, there is the bottle bill, House Bill 5340, that is very important to support. It helps economic savings and also reduces plastic pollution. That is a real good counterattack to the plastic bottling operations going on in Bloomfield. And I won't go too much into bills. You can read the bills that the Connecticut League is supporting online at ctlcv.org. Look for our watch list. There's two other things that I want to touch on before I pass the mic on to Representative Reyes. We'll take questions later.
Why don't you repeat that site?
Oh, ctlcv.org. lcv.org. And look for our watch list. There's two other things that I wanted to discuss before passing the mic on to Representative Reyes. So we're here at an environmental racism forum, and I feel like it's important for me to discuss how representation matters in this line of work and in every line of work. When I got involved in the environmental movement, I did notice that it was primarily white people advocating day in, day out, until I searched and I stumbled upon a couple of my heroes in the room, Leticia Colon de Mejias and Representative Reyes over here. Representation matters because you want to see yourself in someone else. You want to see someone who is a similar skin tone to you, and someone you can hear when you're speaking as well. And their commitment to anti-racist policies is something that really makes this movement matter as well. What makes this movement matter moving forward is your dedication to making an anti-racist organization. That is one of the best ways to combating environmental racism, empowering Black and Latino and LGBTQ and disabled folk to become the leaders of your organization, because the organization, this movement, it's not always going to be one color, one focus. There's a variety of focuses that we have to incorporate. We have to show that we are good neighbors to the variety of other causes, other issues that are affecting underrepresented communities. And so in addition to that, I think it's really important to donate to persons of color-led organizations, donate to the NAACP, donate to Bridgeport Generation Now, donate to the Green Eagle Warriors, because these are groups on the ground working within communities to raise up those who have been neglected in society. It's important that, you know, when another environmental racism forum workshop is held, that that we see newer faces taking leadership in their communities, and Taylor and I and Representative Reyes will be right behind them, cheering them on. And so that is my focuses.
So Representative Geraldo Reyes is a representative from Waterbury in his third term, and as you already heard, is a real champion of environmental issues and standing up for people who are less represented and need more representation and more power in making decisions regarding environmental issues that cross different pieces of intersectionality is what I want to say. So here you go.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
It's my honor and privilege to be here, not only representing the great city of Waterbury, 75th District, but also this great state of Connecticut. I'll give you a little background about myself. I'm a trained engineer. I spent 36 years in the industry, probably 25 of those actually polluting the very things I'm fighting against today, unbeknownst to myself. But I'll give you a little background about where I was raised and what I saw as a young teenager. So I was raised right next to the Naugatuck River, back in the industrial, when Waterbury's heyday, when the Naugatuck River was, depending on the day of the week, green, pink, blue, orange. I played in that river along with all my friends in the neighborhood. We didn't know any better, and who knows? I mean, who knows what it costs, but we come down as we learn and live that what we were playing in was actually chemical dumping and right into the river. And back then, we didn't think much about why there wasn't any fish in that river. We saw it as we used to play in the river, hop on the train went up and down, we had fun, we were kids, what did we know? So fast forward, past grade school, all those things that I'm sitting here thinking about my piece of the speech tonight, of what Taylor was thinking about when she was talking about Seneca Village. In Waterbury, I lived in a Seneca Village. We were actually gutted out for renovation of I-84. So that took out 3,000 mainly Hispanic Puerto Rican families out of the I-84 section when they went to I-84 some 40 years ago. And again, not putting two and two together, not seeing that, again, it was a marginalized community that was affected, and connecting the dots all these years later, we see this over and over and over again. But I had the opportunity to graduate from local schools, and then I actually went on and got a 2 years degree in associate industrial engineering, and then I got a 4-year degree, excuse me, in manufacturing engineering, and I continued my studies on through the University of New Haven. But I spent 36 years in industry, so I know the good, bad, and the ugly from the engineering side and from my career in industry. Fast forward to today, I find myself in the political arena, never looking to get involved with politics. But I was one of those folks that with the new magic formula that companies use today, you get in your early 50s, you're making great money, and thank you very much for your 28 years of service, but we don't need you anymore. And that's me, that happened to me. So I found myself always being a political advocate, always advocating for everybody else. I ran campaigns for many, many elected officials in Waterbury for over 20 years. never had any interest in doing it myself. Only got involved, actually, quite honestly, be very frank with you, I only got involved because the candidate I replaced got in trouble. And we found ourselves with no candidate, so I'm the placeholder. I said, after looking high and low, we couldn't find anybody, and we didn't want to let that window of opportunity pass. So, you know, why turn over the district to somebody who's done no work in the district? So I said, I'll hold it, I'll run in the special election, and that was 3 cycles ago. So I'm starting my, this year in November, if I get elected again, I'll be starting my 4th cycle. And you find, things happen for a reason. I find myself in Hartford being a person that has had a lot of private business sense, and not to say that the government and the government, big or small, doesn't have good business sense, but if you bring in a business perspective and you start looking at things a little bit different than people who I would quite openly say that have been in politics their whole life and don't look at it from a business standpoint. So right away, I figured, well, I'm going to go into commerce, and I did that. And then I joined the manufacturing caucus because that's my expertise. And then I went into appropriations because I learned a long, long time ago you have to follow the money to find out what's really going on. So I went into appropriations. I was very interested in transportation, so I'm in the transportation committee, and lo and behold, this little thing called environment, which I knew nothing about, was just calling my attention. And does anybody here know Kevin Zach? Kevin Zach from Naugatuck, from the Naugatuck River Revival Group? Google him, Kevin Zach, Z-A-K, a one-man gang who has pretty much brought back the Naugatuck River almost by himself before he got help. One-man gang. Everything I know about environment and everything that I have proceeded to follow has all come from the teaching of Kevin Zach. And I have coffee with the gentleman a lot. He said, if they have a slot in environmental, can you please join the environmental group? You can bring a lot of good insight to that. And I said, I don't know anything about environment. He says, you know more than you think. Just go join. Long story short, I did join. That very first year that I was in, Waterbury had a 5 million gallon raw sewage dump into the Naugatuck River. 5 million gallon dump. 1 day passed, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. 5 days later, they told the mayor. Okay? So no public signage, no public awareness. Kevin Zach, St. Gentleman, is the guy that says something's wrong. The fish are sideways in the water and they're flopping up on the rocks. Sure enough, a couple more days go by, 7, 8 days, they backtrack it to a accident at the sewage treatment plant. And again, 5 million gallons of raw untreated sewage went into the Naugatuck River. That was the action for this representative to get involved. It was literally less than a mile from my house. It's the Naugatuck River I grew up playing in. And I went down there, and I went on the shore and looked, and sure enough, there were all the fish dead sideways on the rocks. Not to mention what it smelled like. It was awful. So got back to Hartford and put in my first bill that I've actually wanted to legislate and get passed through, and that was the sewage bill Right to Know Act, and that was that passed in So this happened in 2017. In 2018, we passed the bill on the very first try. Came out of committee, passed in the House almost unanimously, and it got called to the Senate, and it passed. And it passed on the last night of the Senate. So the Senate has a way of making you really, really not count your ducks until they really. So the Senate passed it on the last night, and it was a very, very rewarding experience for myself. And that was my aha moment. Said, oh my God, a person who had no political experience has been able to navigate Hartford, which is a political landfill, a man full of minds, if you will. So I felt really, really great about the environmental committee, and I learned so much many people, and listen, this passed bipartisan, this is not a Democrat or Republican, this is a problem for the only environment we have. We only have one world here. So that propelled me to go further. The year after that, we fought the expansion of a transfer plant into the south end of Waterbury. My district already had over 18 major polluters in that one district. Over 18. In there is that waste treatment plant, O&G plants, the transfer plant, not to mention 7 or 8 other small size manufacturers. It's a major polluting site. I hate to say it, but everything that nobody wants anywhere else in the city is located in the south end. So that propelled me to dig into fighting this at that, and I'll name the company, it's F&G. We actually fought with them for almost a year. At the end of the day, we lost. They got their expansion, but it didn't go down without community awareness, without community involvement, with notifying everybody in 3 different languages, something that they try to get done under the radar. So that propelled me to come up with the Environmental Justice Bill, which already existed, but never been challenged. Waterbury was the first one to challenge the Environmental Justice Bill. We had 2 hearings with DEP, and that's an involved process in itself. The company made one fatal mistake. They did not, there's a section in here that says they did not include the community in its native tongue. So the majority of the folks that live in that area spoke Spanish. They never advertised in Spanish, they never publicized it in Spanish newspaper, and that was the only thing that we had to hang on to have a hearing, which we did. So the Department of Energy and Environmental came down, they actually held a formal hearing. The one evening that I was extremely proud to be from Waterbury, when I looked in that City Hall, Veterans Hall, and there was over 1,000 people there from all over the city. That is the one thing that united that city, because other than that, it's a very divided city, very, 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 very political city. When I went up to the microphone to speak to the Department of Energy and Environmental, there was almost 1,000 people behind me. You feel a part of something. You feel like, wow, everybody gets it. It's not just me saying, hey, this is an injustice. This shouldn't be in this part of the city. We shouldn't be expanding on anything else here. So I'll fast forward. The EJ bill that we're trying to propose now will make sure that going forward that no more than 6 polluters in any one entity, unless the town or municipality has a hearing and it's approved by the town or municipality, alders, or the leaders of that particular state. So no more under the radar, no more sliding in more companies that are going to pollute. It isn't going to do anything right now for my district, which already has 18, and with the one that just passed, 19. And but it will allow for other communities to do a couple things. One, be able to communicate amongst themselves before the company comes in. So you don't want to know after it's been installed. Secondly, they will have to show you, again, in writing and in public hearings, of what the actual intent of this company is going to be. And then thirdly, which I think is more important, if the town or municipality or the city deems that they have to make good somehow to that community, then that also becomes part of it. So I think that the biggest thing about this to me is the transparency piece, because a lot of this happened in Connecticut, which is no different than what happened back to Seneca Village back in the turn of the century. It just got swept away because they didn't know any better. They were the poorest, and we were going to take the land by eminent domain by any means necessary, and they did. And the same thing happens when they're putting in all these major polluters into a district. The district that I represent has one of the highest asthma rates in the state of Connecticut. It's not by accident, guys. It's not by accident. It's not with that many polluters in that one zone. It's the area that I live in. Last summer, our waste treatment plant, I don't know, half a dozen times a year has the foulest air, and it's there for a night or two. So let's say half a dozen times during the summer, when you're supposed to be enjoying your summer, there's a half a dozen nights where you're outside barbecuing or you're in the back porch and you smell this. And because Waterbury is separate, it's divided by a river, so there's two valleys, the west side, which is Highland Avenue, and the south side, the east side, which is Baldwin Street. And of course, the waste treatment plant's right in the bottom, so it goes up and then over. So it affects the air quality of half of Waterbury and all of Naugatuck. And sometimes they say they smell it as far up as Prospect and all the way over to Middlebury. So again, foul air doesn't know zip codes and where to stay. Foul air is foul air. And that was another big fight that I had with the city. And that one got, again, we brought a lot of attention to what we call environmental injustice, and the fact that a municipality will allow this to happen year in, year out, knowing that there is a fix for it. You've already found the root cause. Now you need to make the investment and actually fix it. And to me, the injustice is that if that were a different part of the city, it would have already been fixed, and that's my problem. And that's where I have been fighting with the City Hall and with DEEP and with anybody who will give me the time of day. I have found myself explaining over and over what environmental racism looks like, what environmental justice looks like, what social inequalities look like, and trying to make it equitable for all. And this has come out of real life situations, and that's the part of the reason why I continue to get up every morning and get excited to get up to Hartford and fight for bills that I think that are pertinent to the people. I am one of those politicians because I came out of private corporate. I had my own private life before I got up there. I don't consider myself a lifelong politician, nor do I intend to be one. But what I found is that we need to create a base, and that's why it excites me to see Alex and Taylor here, because this is what the future of the environmental justice looks like. These two young folks right here, and I think that, let's please give them a round of applause. This is what it looks like, because an old timer like myself has only a limited amount of years left in Hartford, but I will be glad to hand over the baton to either one of these two who have absolutely know more about the environment than I do, and actually they're grounded in the basics of what they need to do to improve this earth for their children and their children's children. So I will leave you with this. The bill is 5103. It's environmental justice. I have copies for everybody here. And I do want to just mention real quick, this Friday there's a hearing, a public hearing, and anybody who can testify in person should, and it's for climate change education. It's House Bill 5215, and I think that right now it is not mandatory to teach climate change in schools, and this bill will make it so that it's mandatory. And I think regardless of what side of the coin you're on climate change, I think we can all agree that the earth is telling us something. Things are definitely changing, and I would like to have folks like yourself who care about this one world we have to take a look at House Bill 5215. If you can testify, please do. And again, I'm Geraldo Reyes from Waterbury. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
So we have about 20 minutes for questions?
Yeah, so I'll collect, if people have index cards, I will collect them.
Do people know about index cards? I
Yes.
didn't know
Oh,
about
yeah,
it.
index cards, they check
So-
it. Thank you. We can start off with some of these.
Do you want to just do it?
No, you can do it.
Okay, so here's one. Can you tell us about pending legislation on the IREJN legislative watch list. Is there anything else you would add to the list?
Oh.
Is that for you?
Microphone. So some of the bills on there include the modernizing the bottle bill. That's up in the environmental public hearing this Friday. Banning PFAS chemicals in firefighting foam is also up on the environmental public hearing on Friday. They're looking at banning chlorpyrifos. No one knows how to say it. It is a pesticide. It is used widely in Connecticut. It is terrible. There is no safe level of exposure for it. That is also up for the public hearing on Friday. Are there any other bills?
Yes, offshore drilling for
Yes.
oil.
Gas and oil.
Gas and oil on Friday.
Yes, that's correct. The offshore drilling is very important. But like I said, the bill that I'm referring to is House Bill 5215. And this gentleman also reminded me, if you can't testify in person, you absolutely can send in your written testimony through email.
Yeah.
Very
simple.
Okay.
Very
Yes, very important. Next question.
Oh, actually, can I say something? You know, that little watch list, it's only 8 bills. I put it together fairly quickly because I knew those were some of the ones that our advocate partners were also working on. But the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters has a comprehensive list on their website. It's their watch list, and they have a really long list. So that's a great resource.
Right. Okay, when a quote polluting site unquote is not allowed to be put in a poor neighborhood, where is the site built? Is it built, or does the polluting site not get built if they can't put it in a poor neighborhood?
Great question. That came up in hearing as well. Representative Mary Mashinsky from Wallingford brought that up, and she asked that several times. In fact, she asked it half a dozen times. And so the thought process there was, we're not anti-business. We're not trying to kill business. We're actually trying to ask the business to be good neighbors and be non-polluters. So they have to take a look at energy fighting ways so they can pollute less, if you will, and not kill the business. So we're not saying that the business can't be built, or that the business it's not worthy of existing, but we're just asking to be a good neighbor. And these bills are not against trying to stop a business, but you should look at being a good neighbor, especially in this day and age when we're talking about new green deals.
That's another question. What a great
That
lead-in.
wasn't an answer. I wrote the question. I'm really interested in if it's not deemed proper for a poor neighborhood, or the poor neighborhood fights back, where, if any place, does it get built? I'm not talking about what you were saying. I want to know, does it get built in a nice neighborhood, for example, or no neighborhood?
Very seldom. Yeah. Very seldom will it get built in a nice neighborhood, so more often than not, it will be in a marginalized community matter. Yes.
And if not there, then does it get built at all? Do they have to go
Each-
somewhere else?
Each situation, each case is different. I mean,
So the can is simply kicked down the road. Isn't that the answer?
we try not to kick it down the road. I mean, if a business is trying to open, we're not saying we're against the business, but we're asking you to be a good neighbor and not be there are ways that you can do it without polluting, without adding pollution to the existing footprint. Would you agree that 18, 19 sites in one zip code would you agree that that's too many?
It's disgusting.
Okay, well that's.
What I'm trying to say, it's utterly disgusting and should be criminal.
And if we don't do anything about it, before my next birthday, the 20th polluting company will be in there. So this is why we're bringing it into attention, because these communities have been completely destroyed and marginalized, and people's health, people's lives are at stake here. And it's not a coincidence that we have the worst asthma rates in the state of Connecticut, and they say probably the whole eastern seaboard in that one area waterway. So.
But can I actually answer that too? Can I tag something on? So one of the things that we're really working on is helping people reduce their plastic pollution, or single-use plastic, because one of the environmental racism forums that I did last year, someone said, you know, what is something that people can do to reduce environmental injustice? And the speaker said, reduce your single-use plastic, because plastic is produced in communities of color, and it is burned and incinerated in communities of color. And so whenever you're using plastic, it is impacting those communities. And that's actually part of the reason we ordered all those like bamboo cutlery things, is because we're really trying to give people avenues to make change. And so the thing is, I think when we don't allow these dirty, you know, polluting companies to come into neighborhoods that are already overburdened, we're all going to have to make different choices, and that means that we're going to have to use less. We don't need as much fashion in our lives. Fashion is actually one of the biggest polluting things that we have on this planet. We don't need single-use plastic. You've got to make choices. I mean, when I switched from plastic, I said, I'm not going to have a coffee. If I don't bring my reusable coffee, I'm not getting coffee. That happened one time. I mean, I was so miserable the whole day because I wouldn't let myself get coffee. I never forgot that reusable cup again. But it's going to take some sacrifice on our part. And the thing is, you know, I work with a religious community. We're interfaith. You know, the idea of sacrificing some personal comfort for the greater community good is something that is part of pretty much every religious tradition out there. And the idea that we should all be working for justice and for the communal good is also something out there. So when we start saying no more, that is going to force businesses to come up with better plans.
We'll do another question. Anyway, this was a good segue. How do Green New Deal types of policy work with environmental racial justice, especially with reference to creating real jobs? For example, solar installation, retrofitting installation, transportation, urban agriculture, or what else? What jobs would be good? And that could be for anybody, I guess.
Yes. So, largely thanks to Leticia and her mentorship, I've learned that energy efficiency jobs are some of the most viable paths to making a green economy in Connecticut. Energy efficiency reduces energy consumption, it helps you save money on your energy bills, and it reduces the likelihood of asthma and other respiratory diseases in your home. And I want to draw light to the fact that everybody pays into an energy efficiency fund, a conservation load management program, and this program has been rated five times in our state's history, and that is very unjust. There is an energy efficiency board appointed by the state that brings in contractors and big utilities together to discuss, you know, how are they going to enroll more people in this program? How well is this program doing in this area of the state? How well is it doing in that area? And underneath it all, they have a budget this big for marketing, and they use this little of it to promote the actual Energize Connecticut service. It's important that we support energy efficiency jobs, and especially tell your neighbor if you notice that they have a crack in their foundation to sign up for the program, because you're supporting the environment and you're supporting labor. The Green New Deal is coming back this year. There's a press conference tomorrow at the Capitol, and it has a few things in mind. It has us getting to 100% renewable energy as a goal. It has accountability language to hold big polluters accountable. It has a strong environmental justice lens, and it has support for energy efficiency programs in it. And the legislators championing this in the Labor Committee, Senator Kushner and Representative Porter, they really need your support, because they've been getting beat up over this because of all the negative connotation over Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and the Green New Deal. Who says we can't have clean energy, clean air, and good jobs. Not anymore, you know?
Yeah, so, well, the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs, one of our focus areas is the offshore wind developments in New London and now in Bridgeport. And with these big Swedish or European companies coming here, there's a lot of money and potential for economic development in these cities, which are predominantly Black and brown. So we focus a lot on raising awareness in the community. It's referred to as grass tops organizing, so connecting with some of the community leaders in the different cities and letting them know that there's a potential for a lot of new jobs, and trying to get those job training programs to the city so that when these big companies come and install these huge wind turbines, that people are prepared and know and have the skills to do that work. So yeah.
So, one thing I wanted to mention, I was in the Capitol today, actually staffing the replica solitary cell, and this is just more legislation that's coming up to end solitary confinement. So I'm going to ask people to start passing that around, just basic information that we would probably want to know more about. And in terms of what bills are coming up when and where, I picked up a few extra copies when I went by this in the hall at the Capitol. So this list, it looks like pretty much everything. It's in tiny print. I haven't even looked at it myself yet, but I know besides the press conference for the Green New Deal at 9:30 tomorrow, that's followed by a public hearing. So I'm going to be going, and maybe some of you will go too. Okay, one more question or two if we have time. Can you point to resources or concrete examples of effective ways to center the voices of or shift power to those most affected by these injustices, especially for historically white-led and middle-class organizations doing this work? How to partner or support without co-opting?
Thank you. About 10 years ago, First Light Power moved into, again, the south end of Waterbury. And they were another company that was fought off, that the company didn't want, the citizens from that area didn't want them there. Long story short, they formed a partnership with the community. And what they decided to do was they were going to add either a park or more green space or trees. And they gave the South End Neighborhood Association, which is one of the neighborhood groups there, they gave them $10,000 a year, up to 10 years, so that they could actually beautify and continue improving that area. And that was a trade-off for them coming in, because they had already passed all their permits. We had no legal ground to stop them from coming in. But one example of working with that company, and they working in turn working with the community, was that they actually gave the community $100,000 to actually beautify that particular area. And that was over 10 years ago. And we planted a lot of trees, and we fixed up 2 parks with that money. So there's a perfect example of that, working in partnership with a company that's already in place.
Did either of you want to comment?
Yeah, so I would suggest too, like, in order to shift power, I think you have to acknowledge the power that you have. So for me, I think about the different platforms I have, whether that be on social media, Facebook, Twitter. So thinking about whose voice am I actively choosing to elevate and share with other people in my network, and even if it's word of mouth, what organizations am I promoting? What am I talking about with the people in my life and around me? And then where am I putting my money? So thinking about what power do you have, and how you can support people that are already doing the work, right? Signing up for action alerts from different organizations that are doing the work that you agree with, and following them closely. There's so many organizations already out there doing this stuff, talking about these issues, so you can really elevate them. So.
Nowadays, yes.
Actually, there's 3 on here, but one I think is a yes/no answer. If the climate curriculum bill goes through, is it true that it will be the first of its kind in the nation? Do you know, and is that a yes or no?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, moving on, great. This is a really interesting question. What constitutes equitable when dealing with things like seizing land for the I-84 expansion? Is that when you take land, you take property by eminent domain, you're supposed to, provide, you can't just take it, you can't steal it, you have to provide compensation, and I thought maybe that was sort of what the question was. Anybody want to?
I'll take a shot at it. So I can, again, from my own living case study. So when I-84 was widened through our neighborhood and 3,000 people were displaced, the former land or homeowners were compensated for their home, and people like our family that was the landlord, we were tenants. So they compensated us by moving us out of that neighborhood and into another neighborhood. So that's the only way I can remember that. I mean, other than that, we got absolutely nothing. And that whole neighborhood, which was folks that we all went to school with, grammar school, and we were together for years, was pretty much decimated and gone. So you can't put a value on that. All I can tell you is that they took care of housing and they took care of paying the homeowners. But other than that, that's the end of it. We have a widened I-84 through our old neighborhood now.
I just have to share one other example that's really amazing to me. And I covered this because it was a huge story. In New London, I don't know how many years ago, 10 or more years ago, there was a case that went to the Supreme Court because people, I hope I have this right, the city of New London decided that it was okay for a private entity to take property to build something that really, Okay, New London, not the city, but the redevelopment authority, okay. So anyway, the people, they were living, and I went there because I was reporting on it, and they lived in this area that was like just right on the water. I mean, it sort of, jutted out into the water, and people wanted to stay there, and they all got kicked out, and they raised the properties, and then nothing was ever built. So, yes, Sven.
It was actually in relation to the question I had. I know folks that are purposely right now planting that space with edible plants because they're due to food injustice or food apartheid. So guerrilla gardening and things like that.
Oh, good. So it is being put to use.
Yes.
All right. So there's one last just quick thing. Should we contact our state reps and senators to support these bills now?
Yes. Tonight.
I mean, I think the question was now. Is now the time? Obviously, we should do that. So yes, do it. And if you want to take one of these, you can see what else is coming up. And don't forget to check LCVCT or CTLCV.org. They do have a really great list of bills. Want to thank all of our panelists.
Thank you.
I learned a lot. And thank you all very much for coming. And please have some food on the way out.
Take some to your friends.